In the 1970s, Israel's diplomatic presence in South America was a delicate dance, marked by both opportunity and peril. Following the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, ties with South American nations grew. By the 1970s, Israel aimed to solidify these connections, extending cooperation in trade, technology, and military assistance. The continent offered both a market and allies amidst the escalating Cold War. Yet, behind the scenes, the political landscape was fraught with tension. Argentina, a nation with a substantial Jewish population and historical ties to Israel, embodied both promise and instability. The early years of the decade were dominated by a turbulent political climate. The nation experienced a series of military coups, social unrest, and political assassinations. In 1970, Argentina oscillated between leftist extremism and right-wing militarism, breeding an environment ripe for violence. The relationship with Israel was complex. While both nations exchanged diplomatic gestures, Argentina was also grappling with internal conflicts that often manifested as anti-imperialist sentiments and, unfortunately, anti-Israel rhetoric. Leftist groups in Argentina, such as the Montoneros and the People's Revolutionary Army, gained traction during this period. Fueled by a desire for social justice and revolution, these organizations often targeted perceived enemies. Their anti-Zionist stance was not merely a political reflection, it was a dangerous undercurrent that often turned violent. Young revolutionaries saw Israel as a symbol of Western imperialism, a puppet of American interests. This perspective, inflamed by a mix of anti-Semitic tropes and regional grievances, painted Israeli diplomats as legitimate targets. As tensions soared, so did incidents of violence against Israeli interests in Argentina. Misinformation and propaganda spread like wildfire, fueling mistrust. The whispers of conspiracy escalated into a cacophony of accusations. Israel found itself navigating a minefield where every diplomatic move could spiral into diplomatic disaster. By 1970, Argentine hatred toward perceived foreign influence was rampant. In this volatile climate, an incident was about to erupt, one that would rock the foundations of diplomacy between Argentina and Israel. The abduction of the Israeli diplomat wasn't just an act of violence, it was a statement, an attempt to send shockwaves through international relations. The stakes were high. The diplomat held not only power, but also information that, if mishandled or disclosed, could ignite an international crisis. His kidnapping sent ripples through diplomatic circles. Did his captors realize the gravity of their actions? The potential ramifications went beyond borders, reaching into the heart of Cold War geopolitics. Israel, already on the defensive due to rising anti-Israel sentiment, found itself fighting to protect its citizens while tackling an unexpected assault on its sovereignty. As the world watched, the stage was set for a confrontation that could escalate into a diplomatic nightmare. In the midst of the chaos, a question loomed large. Could Israel negotiate the safe return of its diplomat without conceding to the extremists who had targeted him? Or was this act of kidnapping merely the opening act in a far larger political drama? Stay with us to uncover what happened next. Just after midday on March 16, 1970, a bustling sidewalk in Buenos Aires became the backdrop for a harrowing act of political violence. A prominent Israeli diplomat, Zvi Eliyahu, was seized. Eliyahu had been the first secretary at the Israeli embassy, playing a pivotal role in fostering diplomatic relations in a region fraught with turmoil. Little did he know, he was walking into a storm. As Eliyahu made his way back from a meeting, a vehicle veered dangerously close, and masked men erupted from the shadows. In mere seconds, Eliyahu was pulled into the car, overwhelmed by the swift, ruthless tactics of his abductors. This act was not random. It was part of a calculated campaign orchestrated by leftist guerrilla factions, fueled by a toxic mix of revolutionary fervor and rising anti-Zionist sentiment. Argentina in the early 1970s was a tinderbox. After a series of military coups, the political landscape was marred by instability and repression. Leftist groups like the Montoneros were fighting back against what they perceived as imperialist influences, and Israel, with its connection to the United States, became a target. The capture of Zvi Eliyahu was rooted in a broader struggle, an assertion of power and a message to the world. The revolutionaries would not be silenced. Back at the embassy, Chaos erupted the moment the news of Eliyahu's kidnapping reached the Israeli officials. Hours were consumed in emergency meetings as they weighed their response. Would they negotiate with armed extremists, or would they risk escalating a crisis that was already teetering on the edge? The Israeli government quickly mobilized, realizing that the implications stretched far beyond Eliyahu alone. This was about national pride and the safety of every diplomat posted abroad. Simultaneously, the Argentinian authorities scrambled to address the abduction. Their credibility was on the line. Having already been viewed as struggling to maintain order with their own civil conflict, the last thing they could afford was an international incident. They faced mounting pressure from both local and global communities, and the prospect of a significant diplomatic fallout loomed. Fidel Castro's Cuba watched closely, eager to see if Argentina could handle this crisis or if they would falter under pressure, potentially paving the way for further exploitation by leftist groups. The clock was ticking. In Israel's eyes, every minute counted. Public outrage mounted as the Israeli media painted Eliyahu as not just a diplomat, but a casualty of increased hostilities faced by their nation abroad. Meanwhile, the Argentine government, trapped between revolutionary fervor and the demands of international diplomacy, faced a dilemma of their own. Who knew what the abductors had planned with Eliyahu? Were they seeking a ransom, a political statement, or something more sinister? As these questions swirled, hope began to wane. Compromises seemed out of reach, and both nations braced for what was bound to be a tumultuous confrontation. The abduction created shockwaves that rippled through diplomatic channels. It was clear that a reckoning was imminent. Would Israel's response escalate tensions and lead to military action, or could they find a way to negotiate the release of their diplomat without further bloodshed? The stakes were rising, and time was running out, leaving both sides scrambling for their next move. As Eliyahu was held captive, the world held its breath. What would happen next? The abduction of Zvi Eliyahu sent shockwaves reverberating through the corridors of power worldwide. The Israeli government sprung into action, immediately assessing the implications of this brazen act. But they weren't the only ones watching closely. Other nations began to evaluate their positions amid rising tensions. The United States was deeply concerned. The Cold War was at its zenith, and U.S. interests in Latin America were critical. Washington's response centered around two main objectives: ensuring the safety of Eliyahu and not jeopardizing its burgeoning relationship with Argentina. They understood the volatile nature of Argentina's political landscape. The threat of leftist guerrillas loomed large. The last thing the U.S. wanted was to fuel a regional conflict that could spiral into something greater. European nations chimed in, countries like France and West Germany, having had their own share of political skirmishes, expressed solidarity with Israel. Their diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent discussions about collaborative efforts to secure Eliyahu's release. They were concerned, not just for Eliyahu's life, but for the implications this kidnapping might have on international diplomacy and the growing wave of anti-Zionist sentiments echoing through Europe. But what did this mean for Argentina? The nation was already grappling with internal chaos brought on by military coups and rampant dissent. By harboring kidnappers of an Israeli diplomat, they risked alienating not just Israel but also their Western allies, including the U.S. The Argentine government worked to present a facade of control, insisting they would not allow the abduction to ruin their diplomatic objectives. However, behind closed doors, tensions were high. Facing pressure from both the militant groups and international allies, their position was precarious. Would they negotiate with the kidnappers, or would they risk confrontation, which could lead to further violence in the streets of Buenos Aires? Meanwhile, Israel implemented heightened security measures abroad. Every Israeli mission in every corner of the world suddenly became a potential target. The government mobilized intelligence resources and heightened surveillance, knowing that this incident could inspire copycats. Their diplomatic envelopes, once filled with discussions of peace and cooperation, now contained urgent security protocols. There was also a broader, more troubling implication of Eliyahu's abduction. It was a wake-up call for Israel, an indication that they would need to continuously reassess their international strategy. Tensions with Argentina might deepen, but the fallout could ripple through their relationships with other Latin American countries, too. The specter of anti-Israel sentiment and the allure of radical politics became palpable threats. The Israelis recognized that their security depended not just on the military might, but on the delicate fabric of diplomacy and trust built over decades. As months passed, the investigation into Eliyahu's disappearance yielded little progress. The kidnappers vanished as mysteriously as they had struck. The abduction became a flashpoint in discussions about Israel's foreign policies. They needed to pivot quickly, balancing open diplomatic engagement against the harsh realities of political violence. This could lead to a rethinking of how they interacted with nations across the globe. The question hung in the air: how far would Israel go to protect its citizens abroad? Would they engage in overt military action against the threat of kidnappings, and what could that mean for the balance of peace in an already fractured region? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the international fallout and the desperate lengths nations go to reclaim their own. Days dragged on as Zvi Eliyahu remained a hostage in the hands of his captors. The initial shock had given way to frantic negotiations, conducted in shadowy backrooms and hushed corridors of power. The pressure mounted not just on Israel, but also on Argentina as the world watched. On July 15th, after 10 harrowing days, a breakthrough emerged. The Argentine government, facing mounting international criticism and pressure from both the US and Israel, agreed to negotiate the diplomat's release. Behind the scenes, key figures in the Argentine military establishment were desperate to diffuse tensions. They understood the stakes. A drawn-out standoff could spiral into political chaos, jeopardizing their fragile grip on power. The resolution came not through force, but through intense diplomatic maneuvering. Eliyahu was ultimately released unharmed, a relief felt not just in Israel, but across the globe. The operation highlighted the peculiar dynamics of international politics. Leaders often walk a tightrope between negotiating with terrorists and maintaining national security. Eliyahu's return marked a moment of respite against a backdrop of escalating violence. But the aftermath ran deeper than the release of one man. For Israel, the event was a game changer. The abduction underscored a harsh reality. The country had become a target amidst rising anti-Israel sentiments in Latin America. Eliyahu's ordeal prompted a sweeping reevaluation of Israeli diplomatic operations abroad. Security measures ramped up. Diplomats were instructed to operate under tighter surveillance. The general climate grew more cautious, more fearful. In the years that followed, Israel tightened its grip on intelligence operations in the region. The memory of Eliyahu's kidnapping lingered, serving as a grim reminder of the potential dangers lurking in diplomatic missions. The incident catalyzed a broader shift in Israeli foreign policy. They started forming deeper alliances with Latin American nations, seeking to bolster security measures and ensure their diplomats were shielded from potential threats. Today, the abduction of Zvi Eliyahu is often remembered not just as a tense standoff, but as a pivotal moment in the fraught history of political violence and diplomacy. It serves as an enduring reflection on the delicate balance countries must maintain between engagement and self-protection. In the landscape of global politics, it's easy to forget the human stories behind the headlines. Eliyahu's kidnapping reveals the raw complexities nations face when grappling with hostile environments. It wasn't merely an act of terrorism, it was a potent symbol of the geopolitical struggles of the era, reflecting how swiftly trust can turn to betrayal on the world stage. Yet, while the tension that gripped the nation during that fateful summer has faded with time, questions remain. How have these events shaped Israel's approach to international diplomacy in regions still rife with instability? What lessons were learned in the shadows of those 10 days that continue to influence strategies today? Stay with us as we unravel the continued impact of Eliyahu's story, exploring how the echoes of his abduction resonate in current affairs and the ongoing challenges faced by diplomats in a world that remains perilous.